Let's turn back to our breaking news now that we're following all morning. Violent protests overnight in Ferguson, Missouri, 10 days after the shooting death of Michael Brown. The community is still outraged and searching for answers. Well, now there are reports a grand jury could look at evidence in Brown's shooting at some point as early as this week. This is reports of Officer Darren Wilson's version of events are just starting to come out. Joining us now to discuss are Paul Callan, a CNN legal analyst, former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, and Mo Ivory, an attorney and radio personality. Good morning to both of you. A lot to get through this morning. We're going to put the protests aside because I really want to talk about the investigation, the version of events, and the autopsies that we now are learning more about. I want us to first remind viewers and have you guys listen to this version of events. This is by a person who only is known as Josie. She called into a local radio station, KFTK, gave her what she said was a version of events that came from Darren Wilson. A source close to the investigation with detailed knowledge of the investigation says this is accurate in the sense that this is what Darren Wilson told investigators. Take a listen to this.
Michael takes off with his friend. They get to be about 35 feet away, and you know, Darren, of course, protocol is to pursue. So he stands up and yells, "Freeze." Michael and his friend turn around, and Michael starts taunting him. "Oh, what are you going to do about it? You know, you're not going to shoot me." And then he said all of a sudden he just started to bomb rush him. He just started coming at him full speed. And so he just started shooting, and he just kept coming. So he really thinks he was on something. Because he just kept coming. It was unbelievable. And then so he finally ended up, the final shot was in the forehead.
A very different version of events, Paul, than what we have heard previously to this point. What do you make of it? Probably not a surprise that the other person involved in this is a very different story.
Well, it's not a surprise to me because I find in these cases when there are a lot of witnesses to an event, as those witness accounts are revealed, you find that there are different perspectives, and you also find that there may be an entirely different story.
Why haven't we heard this perspective yet?
Well, I think we haven't heard it because traditionally in these what they call officer-involved shootings, the prosecutor, who will be handling the case ultimately, keeps a very tight rein on information. And normally the public isn't looking that closely at the particular case. It's only maybe the family of the person who was killed, and you don't have the kinds of problems that we're seeing here. I think this is the kind of case, because of the rioting, maybe we have to throw out the rule book in how these things are traditionally handled and make the investigation more transparent. I think the officer side of the story should have come out a lot earlier so people could see why there might be a delay in making a decision.
Mo, what do you make of this version of events?
Sure. I agree completely with Paul. I mean, it seems that there is caution taken for any statements that relate to the officer, but when it comes to information about Michael Brown or any of the witnesses that have testified to what they have seen, what they saw in his killing, then it's free reign, and, you know, it's put the information out quickly. But I'm concerned with the prosecutor being willing to hold back on information as it relates to the officer versus information as it relates to, you know, the victim, which is Michael Brown, and which is the actual, you know, sort of person he's supposed to be trying to find justice for. So the cries for him to step down, I think, only increase when this kind of information comes out and it's being protected for the officer.
Well, for me, I guess there's a little bit of a question, Mo, and I want to get your take, is the difference between the prosecutor here and the local police force, if there is a difference. Because one of the criticisms early on is that there was such a selective release of information coming from the police that it fed into this complete lack of trust from the community, and that's not even coming from the prosecutor.
Sure. I mean, I absolutely do think that we all know that there's a difference between what the authorities are supposed to be doing and what the prosecutor is doing. But even very early on, when Ronnie Johnson was appointed, the prosecutor made a comment about not agreeing that Ronnie Johnson should come in and take over for the police department in Ferguson.
That's true.
And he even made a statement that said he did not feel that that was fair to the police because it made them feel inept. So if we're trying to draw the boundaries between the prosecutor and the police department, it would be in the best interest interest of the prosecutor to stop commenting on his thoughts about the police department.
Do you think also, Paul, that the prosecutor, the local prosecutor here, there's a chance that he could be stepping down? What would that do to the case? What would that do to a change of venue type of situation? What do you think?
Well, you know, Kate, you're going to see a big shift now in attention toward the prosecutor.
There sure is. I'm already seeing articles that are calling into question his background.
Well, Bob McCullough, the prosecuting attorney, who's the man in control of this investigation, he's the guy behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Very close ties to the police. Mother, father, uncle, cousin, brother, all employees of the police department at one time or another. His father actually was killed in an incident involving the arrest of a black suspect.
In your mind, does that discredit him to handle this case?
No, it doesn't necessarily in terms of him as a lawyer. He may be the fairest person in the world, but you know that people in the community will be very sensitive to this. Now, the federal government is investigating, so Eric Holder, the Attorney General, could supersede the locals at any point and take over the investigation. You may also see pressure for a special prosecutor to be appointed by Governor Nixon in the case. That's why I think McCullough is convening a grand jury this week to start hearing the case. Usually it's moving fast. Usually these cases move along more slowly, believe it or not, because he doesn't want to be superseded by other prosecutors.
Go ahead, Mo.
And sure, and Kate, it's also important to look at this prosecutor's record. And for example, he prosecuted a case where two African Americans who were killed by two white police officers at a Jack-in-the-Box were not even charged. So when you think about his skills as a lawyer, that's one thing, but his perceptions and the idea of what he believes and how he prosecutes the case is what's really important. So here you have a prosecutor who has a family line of police officers, a father who was killed by an African American, and another case where he didn't prosecute two African Americans that were killed by two white police officers. It just doesn't seem right.
You also have to say, though, you know, we're talking about elected officials in a county.
Absolutely.
And he is the elected, selected by the people prosecutor for St. Louis County. So it's really, you know, it's really hard to say we should throw him out of his prosecutorial role until we see actual evidence of bias. And I don't know that we've seen that yet.
Well, I'm not sure that we haven't, but also when you say elected by the people, and this is not to make an excuse for black people not voting, but we know that there isn't a huge turnout of black people in Ferguson, Missouri, or even in the area that come out to vote. So he's elected by the people that, you know, that are always represented to the advantage. So that's no excuse at all. People need to vote, and that's how things would change.
That is one of the, I think we could say, many lessons that can be learned from this situation. But first and foremost, trying to understand exactly what's happening in this case and exactly what version of events is the truth. That is where this investigation needs to be focused, and that's what we'll be talking about much more here on the show. Mo, thank you very much. Paul, thanks so much. A lot to work through on this case and beyond. Coming up next.